Good afternoon. I love when people respond back. I need more of that. Thank you. Wake up, wake up. I am thrilled to be one of the keynote speakers for this year's Strange Loop. But before I get started talking about the idea of the intersection between humanities and technology, I wanted to start off with something that I'm almost embarrassed to admit. And it's the fact that ever since I moved to Apple's platform after college, I realized that I don't seem to know a single technical specification of any of my devices. I'm lucky if I could tell you the capacity of my iPhone or my iPad, but I certainly don't know the clock speed of this Retina MacBook Pro that I'm using, or how much memory is in my iPad Mini 4. And that's weird for me. I'm a technical person, a programmer by trade. My family has zero problem asking me every technical question they can, or just asking me to build them an app. In high school, I used to build gaming PCs. Every month, I read Maximum PC cover to cover. I could have told you the transistor count on my graphics card. I could have told you the clock speed of Intel's entire lineup. So what happened? Why has Apple gotten me comfortable existing in this space where I just assume that every year they'll come out with a new version of the product that I love, and it'll be half the size and twice as fast? Why am I, frankly, a bit comfortable with being hardware dumb? So I started thinking about the medium that Apple uses to communicate with its customers, or its potential customers. And that's commercials. So really, it's Apple's fault that I don't know this stuff. Apple commercials are much more about the experience of using one of their products. It goes back to the idea of speeds and feeds, and how there was no longer a need for Apple to compete on technical merit. Moving forward, it was simply about the quality of the user's experience. And Apple does just a far better job at this than the competition. I mean, sure, not every commercial is amazing. Certainly not these series of Apple Genius ads. But more often than not, the quality of their commercials is found in how well they show you one of their products fitting into your everyday life. I'm not using Keynote. All right, we're going without notes. It's fine. All right, you were supposed to see this when I got to commercials. And then you were supposed to see this when I made fun of bad Apple commercials. The series of Apple Genius ads. Most unfortunate. As I was saying, more often than not, the quality of their commercials is found in how well they show you one of their products fitting into your everyday life. And I can't think of a better representation of this than Apple's Misunderstood ad from a few years ago. Now, this may be a commercial you've seen before, but just in case you haven't, in it, a teenage boy is on holiday vacation with his family. And he seems like the typical aloof teenager who would rather be anywhere but there. He spends the entire time buried in his phone. And to be honest, you almost want to smack the kid and tell him, hey, pay attention. These are going to be the moments that you're going to be sorry you missed out on when you're older, that you're going to wish you'd cherished. But instead, he spends the entire time buried in his phone. And it's funny because at the end of the commercial, you find out that he's been on his phone this entire time, putting together this beautiful video montage of the family's greatest moments. It's this awesome moment when he reveals it. A haunting rendition of Judy Garland's "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" is playing in the background. The family starts crying when they see the video. He starts crying. And if there were sound on, we'd probably be crying too. And this commercial works, right? I certainly couldn't wait to run and grab my own iPhone and take pictures and video of my family doing anything and everything just to hold on to those moments. But when you think about it, not a single technical specification is mentioned in the entire commercial. You don't know what megapixel camera he used to shoot the video. You don't know how many videos could be stored on his phone. And you don't even know what app he used to edit the video. And none of that seems to matter. And I don't want to pick on anyone, but I would like to compare this to an Android commercial. Remember these absurd Android commercials? The ones that used to yell out, "Droid," in this weird robotic voice at the end? Just take it all in. You look at one of these commercials, and it's so confusing. It's so impersonal. What in the hell has any of this got to do with the experience of using a phone? It might be one of the most technology for technology's sake productions that I could possibly imagine. Michael Bay would be proud. And so I wondered in looking at the misunderstood ad, and then looking at this ridiculous Android commercial, what is it about Apple commercials that's so much more exciting and engaging to me? It just keeps getting better. Why, when I see the silhouette of a person, am I really into it? Because I realize that an iPod commercial is about to come on. So I thought about it, and I think it goes back to this. It goes back to this idea of the intersection between liberal arts and technology. This is a photo from Steve Jobs' last keynote, the March 2011 iPad 2 event. The words that accompany this photo are seen as Jobs' legacy to Apple, and representative of the fact that Apple first creates the user experience, and then they create the technology to fit that user experience. They don't try to shoehorn technology in. And so as a result, Apple products are much more experiential. It's about what you can do with them. Now, the words that accompany this photo are worth repeating because Jobs was right. He was right when he said, it's in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough. It's technology, married with the liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the results that make our heart sing. Woo! It's this beautiful quote. Who doesn't want to make products and experiences that make other people's hearts sing? I know I certainly strive to do that, and I'm sure you do as well. And we've seen over the years that Apple embodies the spirit of this quote. But what does it mean to apply these thoughts practically, particularly for companies or projects outside of Apple? And so this is what I want to spend some time digging into. I want to talk about real-world, practical applications of this intersection between humanities and technology. And I think it's best to start with where Jobs got the idea of this intersection from. And that was his hero, Dr. Edwin Land, the founder of Polaroid and inventor of instant photography. Dr. Land wholeheartedly believed in this intersection between arts and sciences. He saw photography as existing at this very intersection. Dr. Land would hire the smartest art history majors he could, and he would send them off for a few science classes, effectively creating people who stood at this very intersection throughout his company. But it's not like the idea of the intersection started with Dr. Land. No. In the 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci was both an artist and a scientist because in his day, there was no distinction. I could do an entire talk on the works of Da Vinci and how they relate to the intersection of humanities and technology. 1 minute, Da Vinci was painting the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper, and the next he was conceptualizing helicopters, calculators, and solar power. One of Da Vinci's most recognizable works, The Vitruvian Man, combines art, anatomy, and geometry to metaphorically solve the problem of squaring the circle. Likewise, in the 19th century, Ada Lovelace coined the term poetical science to describe the intersection of her studies. Lovelace, the daughter of poet Lord Byron and skilled mathematician Lady Byron, used beautiful metaphors to explain complex mathematical concepts. It was Lovelace's perspective at this intersection that caused her to go beyond the number-crunching capabilities of machines and to instead focus on how humans and society could leverage technology as a collaborative tool. So no, Dr. Land didn't create the idea of this intersection. But what made him great is that he understood that people did not need to know how a product worked in order to enjoy and appreciate the experience of using it. And Dr. Land used this knowledge to create the SX70 camera, which he's seen here holding. It's probably his finest achievement. The SX70 didn't usher in instant photography. Dr. Land had done that 30 years prior. But what it did is it made it easy for the average person to create a memory instantly. You didn't have to worry about gunky film paper or film chemicals getting on your hands and possibly burning them. You didn't have to concern yourself with how much battery to take along with you to take all the photos you wanted, because the battery was built into the film. And the interface was super simple, just two controls. A scroll wheel to focus the shot, and a shutter button to take the photo. That's it. Naturally, hiding all of this complexity from the user meant that there was a ton of complexity within the camera. Does this sound familiar to anyone? It feels like all we do sometimes as developers and designers is we strive to create these simple and intuitive interfaces. We'll spend weeks, if not longer, on the workflow behind a single button. And we pray that when we introduce that button, that people just get it, and it makes sense. And Dr. Land was doing this in the 1970s. He understood that if you removed the complexity from the process of taking photos, that people would instead focus on the art of photography. And Dr. Land didn't just want to sell cameras. No, he wanted to fundamentally change the ways in which people interacted with each other, and he succeeded. Dr. Land delighted in seeing people excited to jump into group photos, take photos of one another, and share them. I could only imagine what he would have thought of selfie sticks today. But this camera came out in the 1970s, and so I'd like to jump again to a more modern representation of this intersection. This is a video game named Never Alone, and it's one of the finest examples we have of what happens when technology leverages the insights of the humanities. Never Alone was created in partnership between the Cook Inlet Tribal Council, a foundation that supports the Alaskan Native people, and Eline Media, a publisher of educational entertainment. Now, the Alaskan Native people were looking for a modern way to share their language and their culture with the world. And they wanted to do it in a way that leveraged technology and leveraged media. So they partnered with Eline Media, and what they produced is this great game. In it, you play from the perspective of Nuna, a young Inupiaq girl and her Arctic fox, as they set out to find the source of the eternal blizzard in order to bring back harmony to the world. This game was created over a 2-year period with nearly 40 Inupiaq storytellers, elders, and community members, all working directly with game developers. And this was a collaboration in the truest sense. It's not like the Inupiaq came in for an afternoon, and then the game developers went off and made this great game. No. The Inupiaq had real say over every stage of the process, from concept to development and marketing. It's amazing that this game exists at all, let alone the fact that it exists to be both fun and educational. Because games like this are too hard to make. You have to do what I see as get 3 things right, all while walking this fine line between the two. You have to have a great story to tell, terrific artistry, and then you need to have the technical prowess to be able to execute on your vision. This should have failed. There are plenty of educational games that exist, and they suck really bad at being fun games. But instead of failing, the game developers worked hard to ensure that everything put into the game was placed there because it was culturally relevant. The Inupiaq believe that man and nature are equals, and so a lot of the obstacles that Nuna and the fox face aren't intentionally trying to bring them harm. Likewise, every reward was put there with real intentionality and purpose. This could have been a documentary, and in fact, you can unlock video clips within the game that explain more about the concept and background. But if it had been a documentary, it wouldn't have reached the audience that it was intended. Because at a time when the Inupiaq feel that technology and video games are pulling the youth away from their language and pulling the youth away from their culture, they're using that same medium to reconnect back to them. It's a terrific game. And I have another that I want to talk about that exists at this very intersection. And it's called Depression Quest. Depression Quest was released in 2013 by Zoe Quinn. And in it, you play from the perspective of someone suffering from depression as they navigate a series of everyday life events while managing their illness and their relationships. Depression Quest plays like a choose-your-own-adventure game. One interesting feature is that as you progress and your depression worsens, options that would normally be available to you and helpful in managing your illness are crossed out, representing the toll that depression can take on your energy levels. Depression Quest is not a fun game to play. It's not. Your typical health bar or energy bar are instead replaced by a description of what medication you're on, what your mood is that day, and whether or not you're seeing a therapist. But it provides a really interesting example of using technology to illustrate what suffering from an illness is like. And Quinn created this game with a specific audience in mind. She herself suffers from depression, and she wanted to create a safe space for those also dealing with the illness to be able to explore the implications of it. And it's had another positive side effect as well, because therapists are using the game to build empathy and understanding with loved ones of those suffering from depression. Technically speaking, Depression Quest is not fancy. It's written in HTML5. Quinn uses a static gray background and atmospheric effects like music that gets progressively more glitchy and haunting to help you get into the headspace of the illness. But the game's still effective. And by making it free and available on the web, she's ensured that it's able to reach and help as wide an audience as possible. And Depression Quest is actually part of a growing genre of games that illustrate what it's like to interact with the world from a challenging point of view. With a clever use of game mechanics, these games are simulating what it's like to be in someone else's shoes and make choices from their perspective. And it's that piece, It's that piece about making choices from someone else's perspective that yields a greater sense of empathy and understanding. It's greater than what we see in linear mediums like books or movies. Take the game That Dragon Cancer, for example. It was made by Ryan and Amy Green to explore the struggle they faced as parents, coping with their son Joel's cancer diagnosis at the age of 1. The name of the game comes from a story that Ryan and Amy would tell their other young children about Joel's illness, likening him to a brave knight fighting a dragon named Cancer. When the game begins, Joel is 5, and he's already been living with cancer for 4 years now. In that time, he's battled 8 tumors, and they've taken a toll on his development. The game unfolds like a series of moments from the family's last year with Joel. You find out, for example, that his development has been slowed during a family outing to feed ducks. One of Joel's siblings asks why he doesn't speak. And as heartbreaking as this moment is, it's the game's use of the family's real voices that makes you feel like you're there, experiencing it with them. Another impactful moment occurs when Ryan and Amy are given Joel's terminally ill diagnosis. And here, an interesting mechanic is used. A child's toy is displayed with pictures of everyone in the room. And clicking on one of those pictures of the family members or the medical staff gives you insight into the raw emotions that each is experiencing, the kind of thoughts that often go unsaid in a difficult situation such as this. Unlike most games, there are no superpowers granted in That Dragon Cancer. In another memory, we hear Ryan's agony through poetry as he spends the night with his son at the hospital following a stomach infection. Joel cries because he's dehydrated, but giving him juice just makes him throw up. Despite Ryan's best attempts, he's unable to make his son feel better. And listening to Joel wail through the night, and then hearing Ryan's feelings of helplessness is sickening. Ryan is a bystander to his son's pain, and it's through this lens that the game conveys its powerful message. Moving forward, I hope we'll continue to see games like this that push the boundaries and explore difficult and complex life issues. Because these games have the potential to help us engage with and understand someone's perspective in a way we've never before experienced. One medium that we use right now to understand someone's perspective in real time is Twitter. Twitter is a powerful platform. Early adopters of it were part of the technology elite, while, generally speaking, everyone who's come since is far more interested in the capabilities of the platform than they are in the technology behind it. These days, people join Twitter to build their public brand or participate in the public discourse. Earlier this year, I started a nonprofit named SoundOff, and we use crowd fundraising campaigns to generate donations. For us, Twitter has been an indispensable tool in helping us reach a large audience of people, people who've never heard of me or SoundOff before. At its best, Twitter can be the place where you learn about the perspective of someone from an entirely different walk of life. And so as a result, Twitter has ushered in hashtag activism. It's made human rights violations that are far away feel very real and close to home. Issues like Arab Spring, Ferguson, Bring Back Our Girls, everyday sexism, and Black Lives Matter have trended worldwide, received mainstream media attention, and official responses from companies and governments. There's something extremely powerful in seeing hundreds of thousands of people tweet about an issue. It galvanizes, creates real support and awareness. That same power, though, also has a negative side. And so Twitter is also the platform where stalkers and harassers run rampant. And they post vile tweets to anyone that they deem unworthy of having a voice. Take what happened recently to Leslie Jones as an example. Just days after the release of Ghostbusters, Leslie was inundated with vile racist and misogynist tweets. To fight back, Leslie began publicizing the most racist tweets, the ones that made demeaning comments about her appearance and likened her to a gorilla. As if that wasn't enough, the trolls then took to mocking up fake tweets authored by Leslie Jones with homophobic slurs. And they spread these tweets on the internet as if they were real. So at one point, Leslie was being inundated with messages from malicious trolls as well as misinformed users who thought she herself was spreading hate. This lasted all day. And in that time, Leslie pleaded with Twitter to help. She asked why they weren't doing more to prevent the abuse she was receiving. She wondered how the hate could be left to just fester and spread. And she thought there should be some guidelines against what she was experiencing. But after 10 hours, Leslie gave up, writing a series of messages about the personal hell she was in and how deeply it disturbed her before signing off for the night. And Twitter, they stood idly by as this situation unfolded and escalated. When asked about the targeted abuse live as it was happening, Twitter had this to say to BuzzFeed News. They said, while we don't comment on individual accounts, here's an explainer on our content boundaries. And helpfully, they included a link to their policies. It actually wasn't until the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, stepped in to help that Leslie began to experience some reprieve. And 24 hours later, Twitter began suspending accounts. But allow me to state the obvious. It shouldn't take the CEO of Twitter stepping in for some action to be taken to mitigate the issue of targeted harassment. And if Twitter can't protect Leslie Jones, who was just in a summer blockbuster movie, then what about the rest of us? Well, we do know what happens to the rest of us, because this isn't the first instance of targeted abuse we've seen on Twitter. We've seen Gamergate. In June, New York Times editor John Wiseman quit the service after receiving a slew of anti-Semitic messages. In April, ESPN put out a PSA with men reading real tweets to 2 of ESPN's women's sports writers. And this was all done in an effort to try to curb the disgusting messages that they are inundated with daily. And we've also seen, unfortunately, that when these instances of abuse are reported, users are left scratching their head, wondering how the hate they've received on the platform couldn't possibly be against Twitter's rules. And Twitter, they're fully aware of the problem. So much so that the previous CEO said in an internal email, "We suck at dealing with abuse and trolls on the platform, and we've sucked at it for years." And he's right. Twitter does suck at this issue. Twitter has to decide what kind of platform it wants to be. And it needs to do it now, because its inaction is speaking volumes. There's a common trend on Twitter of attacks happening to visible women and minorities, already vulnerable groups in society. And Twitter has a responsibility to these people to not lose track of their humanity simply because this is a difficult problem. When these instances of abuse happen, Twitter always says they're working to get better by improving their tools and their enforcement systems. But I'm not sure what that means. We already know of strategies that help make online communities better. We already know that clear guidelines, a commitment to enforcing those guidelines, and timely enforcement works extremely well. So in the case of Leslie Jones, you can't take 24 hours to respond to the targeted abuse that she was receiving. And for non-celebrities on Twitter, you cannot send a message that the vitriol and hate they've received on your platform is somehow not against your rules. Twitter, that's not against your guidelines? Maybe it's time to reassess them then. About 4 months before the targeted abuse that Leslie Jones received on Twitter, Microsoft put out a chatbot named Tay. And Tay wasn't just any chatbot. Tay had artificial intelligence and the ability to learn from other users on Twitter. Really. Microsoft was conducting research into conversational understanding, and its goal was for Tay to get progressively smarter by interacting with other users on Twitter. Actually, how many of you here have active Twitter accounts? Ooh, almost everyone. So you're probably not surprised to find out then that within hours, the users that interacted with Tay turned it into a racist, misogynist truther. Tay started off extremely innocent. Look how excited it was to talk to humans. And within hours, Tay was a bit less enthused. Tay tweeted extremely offensive beliefs, further attacking those already vulnerable groups on the platform, calling for a race war and a genocide. There are so many things that I find remarkable about this story. Even Clippy is confused. I wonder how Microsoft thought it was a good idea to release a bot that could learn from other users on Twitter to begin with. But mostly, I wonder how Tay was left to tweet disgusting things for hours. How was Tay not monitored? Microsoft, you have a responsibility to people to monitor the technology that you release. Support means more than simply assessing uptime and availability. Support means making sure that the products you put out into the world are not inflicting pain on other people. Where were you when Tay started attacking vulnerable people on the platform? And I think most confusingly, there were simple safeguards that Microsoft could have put in place, but chose not to. Why, for example, was Tay allowed to tweet at anyone, including people that hadn't tweeted at it? And why weren't certain words just marked as off-limits? It's not surprising to me that malicious users trolled Microsoft's attempt at corporate PR. Because make no mistake, that's what Tay is. Tay is a bot designed to understand how millennials think so that Microsoft could better target them in marketing campaigns. Look at Tay's profile on Twitter. Who talks like that? I bet Microsoft thinks millennials with disposable income do. Eventually, Microsoft shut Tay down, tweeting one last time from the account before making tweets private. You can't break character, right? After Tay was shut down, Microsoft's VP of Research released an official apology. And for the most part, this is your typical corporate apology. It mentioned how Tay was tested with a diverse group of users, and how Tay's tweets do not reflect the beliefs of its creators or their values. What I found most interesting, though, is that the VP pointed to a similar experiment, successfully conducted in China, as being the inspiration for Tay. Well, being the naturally curious person that I am, I just had to know what made this bot in China so much more successful than Tay. Are there just kinder people in China? So I went looking, and what I found was an article written by the lead of the team that manages the bot in China, named Zhao Weiss. And as I read the article, what struck me is how dramatically different the tone of it was in comparison to what had been written about Tay. The word empathy was used several times to describe Zhao Weiss. In fact, Zhao Weiss stores the user's mood, not their information, so that it can bring a level of empathy to every conversation. Emotional intelligence is so valued on this team that software engineers and psychologists both are on it. This is what made Zhao Weiss more successful than Tay. And it's really what I want to hear from Microsoft's development team as they look ahead to the future of Tay. I don't want to hear about how you can't predict every use of how someone will interact with the technology that you release. What I want to hear is how you're going to build a level of empathy and understanding into Tay moving forward. I want to know that Microsoft has looked beyond their own profits when thinking about who could benefit from this technology. I want to know that Microsoft has really done their research on who could possibly be harmed by this technology, and that they've looked for non-obvious perspectives entirely different from their own. I bet the team that worked on Tay is just as technically proficient as the people behind Zhao Weiss. The difference here between building something awesome and building something harmful is that one team had an explicit goal of empathy, and it was informed by their humanity. It doesn't matter how cool the technology you create is, or how great your algorithms are. If you don't take a moment to consider the people that might interact with the products that you release. And frankly, this is something that I work on myself. I keep a Post-it at my desk simply to remind myself that the oftentimes homogeneous environment that I live and work in Silicon Valley does not represent the greater world out there or the types of people that could use one of my products. I need to keep myself reminded of my blind spots. And sometimes I wonder who on these teams is making sure that product, design, and engineering are thinking and creating with their blind spots in mind. More and more, I'm starting to feel like you actually shouldn't be allowed to build a product until you've put in your 10,000 hours, not on learning about technology, but on learning about other cultures, languages, and experiences. How often do you get out of your own social media bubble? How diverse is your network? And this is a learning initiative that won't ever end. Eventually, my blind spots will evolve over time, and I'll have a new Post-it to help me keep everyone in mind. I'd like to talk about another place where I've seen the intersection of humanities and technology pop up recently, and it was somewhere unexpected: Gadget Reviews. After the introduction of the Apple Watch, BuzzFeed sent 2 of their journalists to record a video of themselves trying on and using the watch for the first time. Now, the video review that they've recorded has been seen over 2 million times. It's been retweeted by the official iTunes account. By all metrics, it's an incredibly successful Gadget Review video. What's interesting, though, is that not a single technical specification is mentioned in the entire video. And instead, what you get is tons of personality. You get lots of emotion. The women talk about how the watch feels natural to wear, how it might fit into their everyday lives. And they talk about how they feel like a Power Ranger while wearing it. Honestly, this Gadget Review video was focused similarly to Apple's own keynote, which didn't talk about technical features like the digital crown, but instead focused on what it was like to wear the watch while running a marathon. And I feel like this Gadget Review video is representative of an evolution taking place. For Gadget Reviews to be how video game reviews have always been, which is focused on the meaning behind a product and what it means to you to use it. There's always going to be a place for purely technical reviews. They're not going anywhere. But I feel like, especially as people get busier and busier, there's also a space for reviews that simply explain whether or not a product is worth your time to investigate further, or the emotion behind it. Speaking of using technology to evoke emotion, I can't think of a better place than Pixar. Pixar is the company that produces the most technologically advanced animations on Earth that make you want to cry. I'm convinced that's their business plan. I couldn't wait to see Toy Story 3. And by the end, I had burst into tears. I hear they're coming out with a Toy Story 4, and I don't think I'm ready for it yet. How many of you have seen the first 10 minutes of Up? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. In it, there's a 4-minute montage with the older main character as you experience his marriage to his wife. You see the joy they experience when they get married, the sadness and despair they feel at their inability to have children, and the utter depression that he falls into when his wife passes away. Every time I see Up, it's a terrible experience. At least that beginning part. Pixar's supposed to produce cartoons, right? But their storytelling is so creative, and it's so relatable, that it transcends the medium of animation. And it's no coincidence that Pixar is one of the most creative places on Earth. In November 2000, Steve Jobs purchased 16 acres of abandoned canning factory land, just north of Oakland, California. And the original plans for Pixar's campus called for 3 separate buildings. There was to be one for the computer scientists, one for the animators, and one for the executives. Naturally, though, Jobs scrapped those plans entirely. And instead of 3 separate buildings, he built a single building with a vast atrium at its center. And this is because Jobs rightly understood that creativity happens when people of different disciplines are exposed to one another. And so he put the most important function of the building, which was facilitating this interaction, at its core. It wasn't enough, though, for Jobs simply to create the space. Of course not. He wanted to make sure that people actually went there. And so first he moved the meeting rooms there. He moved the cafeteria there, the mailboxes, the cafe, the gift shop. It got so bad that Jobs mandated that the only set of bathrooms could be built inside the atrium. Thankfully for Pixar employees, he was later forced to concede on this last point. Now, of the atrium, Brad Bird, the director of Ratatouille and The Incredibles, had this to say regarding the atrium. He said, "The atrium initially might seem like a waste of space, but Steve realized that when people run into each other, and when they make eye contact, things happen." And John Lasseter, the chief creative officer at Pixar, had this to say regarding the intersection. He said, technology inspires art, and art challenges the technology. And I can't think of anybody that challenged the technology more so than Jobs. One of the reasons Jobs is so loved is that he went off and he studied non-traditional engineering disciplines. He took ballroom dancing, he took calligraphy, and then he used his unique perspective to infuse the liberal arts into his products. Jobs saw himself as a humanities person first that loved electronics. And similarly, I see myself as a humanities person first that loves technology. My introduction to programming was a friend giving me C++ in 21 days when I was in 6th grade. And being the absolute type A kid that I was, I just knew that I was going to learn C++ in exactly 21 days. I had no idea what C++ was. But honestly, I was doing pretty well at it. I really was. Until I got to day 8. Pointers. And it was at this moment that I hit a brick wall with my learning. I didn't understand pointers, so I couldn't move on to the next day. And this initial experience with programming shaped how I viewed it for a really long time. I was always afraid that there would be a new brick wall concept that would get in my way and impede my learning. My favorite class in high school was humanities. It was a combination of English and history. And so, because my favorite class wasn't math or science, which I was told were the natural corollaries to programming, I didn't initially see how I could fit into this space. And so one of the things I've been most excited to see is an evolution take place in the ways in which we introduce people to programming. I cheered this past June when Apple announced their new iPad app, Swift Playgrounds. This iPad app has the potential to be the most fun and engaging way to learn how to program. Just look at its 3D graphics. And because students can code directly on the device, they have easy access to multi-touch, the accelerometer, and the gyroscope. I know one of the difficulties for me when I initially learned how to program was figuring out how those concepts could be applied practically. What could I make with what I just learned? Making a calculator in Terminal wasn't exciting to me. I already owned a calculator. But I feel like the built-in graphical and audio capabilities inside of this app are going to make this an inherently exciting prospect to a whole new generation of aspiring coders. That said, Apple products are premium, and so I'm also happy to see initiatives available at various socioeconomic levels. One such free initiative is 1 Hour of Code by code.org. And in it, you drag programmable blocks in order to maneuver the angry bird to its destination. And so esoteric texts like the one I picked up as a kid are being replaced by these fun and these imaginative tutorials. They're full of encouragement. They make you feel like anyone has a right to learn how to program, that everyone should give it a shot if they want to, and that everyone can learn if they want. And these tutorials have had such reach that even President Obama has gotten involved. And so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that through resources like Khan Academy and code.org, we're going to continue to grow the pool of who has access to learning about programming and learning about technology, because this is what our industry needs. We need a demystification that doesn't make people feel like they need to be preternaturally gifted or a genius in order to learn how to program. Programming is a skill. You work at it like anything else. It's important to me that kids who don't feel particularly adept at math or at science still feel like they can make a meaningful contribution to technology. And one of the more exciting things for me in doing the research for this keynote has been seeing just how important the people who stand at this intersection of humanities and technology are for the continued innovation and evolution of our industry. Thank you.